The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training grounds as Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform one last time. At 22 years old, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her determination towered over everyone around her. Today marked the beginning of her journey to become the first woman in her unit to qualify for advanced marksmanship training. The year was 1998, and the military was slowly opening its doors to women in combat roles. Sarah had enlisted 2 years earlier with one clear goal in mind: to prove that gender had nothing to do with shooting accuracy. She had grown up on her grandfather's ranch in Texas, where she learned to shoot tin cans off fence posts before she could properly tie her shoes. Her grandfather, a World War II veteran, had taught her that respect came from skill, not from what others expected of you. As Sarah walked toward the administrative building, she could feel the eyes of her male colleagues following her every step. Some watched with curiosity, others with skepticism, and a few with open hostility. The whispers followed her like a shadow, but she had learned to tune them out months ago. What mattered was the meeting ahead with General Robert Harrison, the commanding officer who would decide her fate. General Harrison had a reputation that preceded him wherever he went. At 58 years old, he was a decorated veteran with 3 combat tours under his belt. His gray hair was always perfectly trimmed, his uniform pressed to perfection, and his standards impossibly high. Nobody in the unit had ever seen him smile, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The soldiers called him the Iron General behind his back, though never loud enough for him to hear. Sarah knocked on the general's office door with 3 sharp raps, just as military protocol demanded. A deep voice from inside commanded her to enter. She stepped through the doorway and immediately snapped to attention, her heels clicking together with precision that would have made her drill sergeant proud. "Private Martinez reporting as requested, sir," she announced, her voice steady despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. General Harrison looked up from the stack of papers on his desk. His steel-gray eyes studied her face for what felt like an eternity before he spoke. "At ease, Private. Have a seat." Sarah moved to the chair position directly across from the general's desk. The office walls were lined with commendations, photographs from various military campaigns, and a collection of antique rifles that spoke to the general's appreciation for marksmanship. She forced herself to maintain eye contact, knowing that showing any sign of weakness would end her dreams before they could begin. "I've been reviewing your file," General Harrison said, tapping the folder in front of him with his index finger. "Your basic training scores were impressive. Top 10% in physical fitness, excellent marks in tactical studies, and your weapons qualification scores caught my attention." Sarah felt a flicker of hope, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, sir." The general leaned back in his chair, his fingers forming a steeple in front of his chest. "Tell me, Private Martinez, why do you want to pursue advanced marksmanship training?" This was the question Sarah had been preparing for since the day she decided to request the meeting. She had rehearsed her answer countless times, but now, sitting in front of the most intimidating officer she had ever encountered, the words needed to come from her heart, not from a script. "Sir, I believe I can contribute to this unit's mission in ways that haven't been fully explored yet," she began, choosing each word carefully. "My scores on the rifle range consistently place me in the top 5% of all soldiers in this division, regardless of gender. I'm not asking for special treatment or for standards to be lowered. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove that skill and dedication matter more than assumptions." General Harrison's expression remained unreadable. The Advanced Marksmanship Program is designed for soldiers who will be deployed in high-risk situations. These aren't target practice sessions, Private. We're training snipers who will operate behind enemy lines, often alone, always under pressure. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Yes, sir. Absolutely. The general stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the training grounds. Several units were running morning drills, their synchronized movements creating patterns across the field like a military ballet. For several minutes, he said nothing, and Sarah began to wonder if the meeting was over. Finally, he turned back to face her. "Private Martinez, I'm going to share something with you that I've never told another soldier in this office. When I was a young lieutenant in Vietnam, I served alongside a South Vietnamese sniper named Nguyen. He was smaller than you, quieter than a whisper, and could put a bullet through a coin at 300 yards. The men in my unit initially dismissed him because he didn't fit their image of what a warrior should look like. Sarah listened intently, sensing that this story would somehow determine her future. Nguyen saved my life on 3 separate occasions, the general continued. Not through brute strength or intimidation, but through precision, patience, and an understanding of his weapon that bordered on mystical. He taught me that the most dangerous assumptions we make are the ones about people's limitations based on what we see on the surface. The general returned to his desk and picked up a photograph from among his personal items. It showed a much younger version of himself standing next to a small Vietnamese man holding a rifle. Both men were smiling, their arms draped over each other's shoulders like old friends. Nguyen died in 1971, 3 days before his tour was supposed to end, General Harrison said, his voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it. A mortar round took out his position while he was covering our unit's withdrawal. Before he died, he made me promise something. Sarah waited, hardly daring to breathe. He made me promise that I would never let preconceived notions about a person prevent me from recognizing their true potential. He said that the enemy doesn't care about the gender, size, or background of the person behind the rifle that takes them out. They only care about the skill and determination of that person. General Harrison set the photograph down and looked directly at Sarah. That being said, Private Martinez, I have serious concerns about your request. Sarah's heart sank, but she maintained her composure. The advanced marksmanship program has a 93% failure rate, the general explained. It's designed to break down even the most confident soldiers and rebuild them into something entirely different. The physical demands are extreme, the mental pressure is unlike anything you've experienced in basic training, and the emotional toll can be devastating. I've seen grown men with years of combat experience wash out in the first week. Sarah knew this was her moment. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, came down to what she said next. Sir, with all due respect, I didn't come here asking for an easy path. I came here asking for the chance to walk the same difficult path as everyone else. I know the statistics, I know the risks, and I know that most people expect me to fail. But I also know something else. What's that, Private? I know that my grandfather taught me to shoot when I was 7 years old. I know that I've never missed a qualification target in 2 years of service. I know that I can field strip and reassemble an M16 in under 90 seconds while blindfolded. And I know that the only way anyone will ever take me seriously as a soldier is if I prove myself by the same standards as everyone else. Sarah paused, then added, I'm not asking you to believe in me, sir. I'm asking you to give me the chance to prove myself. General Harrison studied her face for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth turned up in what might have been the beginning of a smile. You know, Private Martinez, you remind me of someone I used to know, he said. Same stubborn determination, same refusal to accept limitations that others try to impose. He opened her file again and flipped through several pages. Your physical fitness scores are well above average. Your psychological evaluation shows exceptional stress tolerance. Your weapons training instructors have all noted your natural aptitude for marksmanship. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain still. However, the general continued, there's one more thing I need to know before I can make my decision. What's that, sir? General Harrison reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a single brass cartridge. He set it on the desk between them, the metal gleaming under the office lights. This cartridge came from Nguyen's rifle. It was the last round in his chamber when we found his body. For 27 years, I've carried it as a reminder of what real courage looks like. Not the loud, obvious kind of courage that gets attention, but the quiet, determined kind that gets results. He picked up the cartridge and held it in his palm. If I approve your request for advanced marksmanship training, you'll be entering a world where failure isn't just disappointing, it can be deadly. You'll be trained to take lives from distances where you can't see the humanity in your targets. You'll be asked to make split-second decisions that could determine the fate of entire missions and the lives of your fellow soldiers. Sarah nodded solemnly. I understand, sir. Do you? General Harrison asked, his voice sharp again.
Do you understand that there's no glory in what snipers do? Do you understand that the very skills we'll teach you will change you in ways you can't imagine? Do you understand that if you succeed, you'll spend the rest of your military career carrying the weight of decisions that most people couldn't live with?
Yes, sir.
I understand.
General Harrison stood up and walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of Sarah. At this distance, she could see the lines around his eyes, the evidence of years spent making impossible decisions under impossible circumstances.
Stand up, Private Martinez. Sarah rose to her feet, coming to attention automatically.
The general reached out and placed the brass cartridge in her palm, closing her fingers around it. If you're serious about this path, then you'll carry this with you through the entire training program.
It's not a good luck charm, and it's not a trophy. It's a reminder of the responsibility you're asking to shoulder.
Sarah looked down at her closed fist, feeling the weight of the small piece of metal that somehow contained the essence of a promise made decades ago in a jungle on the other side of the world. There's one more thing, General Harrison said, returning to his position behind the desk.
The advanced marksmanship program begins in 6 weeks.
Between now and then, you'll undergo additional physical conditioning, psychological evaluation, and weapons training specifically designed to prepare candidates for the rigors ahead. Sarah felt a surge of excitement, but the general's next words brought her back to reality. This preparatory period has its own failure rate of 47%.
Many candidates wash out before they even reach the actual program.
The instructors will push you harder than you've ever been pushed before, and they'll be looking for any sign that you don't belong there. He picked up his pen and made a note in her file. Furthermore, your request has attracted attention from higher up the chain of command. There will be observers watching your progress, evaluating not just your performance but the wisdom of the decision to include women in this program. You won't just be representing yourself, Private Martinez.
You'll be representing every woman who might follow in your footsteps.
The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy pack, but she didn't buckle under it. Instead, she stood straighter, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable.
I won't let you down, sir.
General Harrison looked at her for a long moment, then picked up his pen again.
We'll see about that, Private.
Report to Sergeant Rodriguez at 0500 hours tomorrow morning.
He'll be overseeing your preparatory training.
Fair warning, Rodriguez has never trained a female candidate before, and he's not particularly happy about starting now. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but her voice remained steady.
I'll be ready, sir. Dismissed, Private Martinez.
Sarah snapped to attention, executed a perfect about-face, and marched toward the door. Just as her hand touched the handle, General Harrison's voice stopped her.
Private Martinez. She turned back to face him.
Yes, sir? For the first time since she had entered his office, General Harrison allowed himself a genuine smile.
Good luck.
As Sarah walked out of the building and into the bright morning sunlight, she opened her hand and looked at the brass cartridge nestled in her palm. The metal was warm from her grip, and she could see tiny scratches on its surface that told the story of its journey from a weapons factory to a jungle battlefield to a general's desk drawer and, finally, to her hand. She slipped the cartridge into her breast pocket, right over her heart, and began walking toward the barracks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome, and new opportunities to prove herself. But, today, for the first time since she had enlisted, Sarah Martinez felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The other soldiers she passed gave her curious looks, and she could almost hear the questions in their minds.
What had happened in that meeting? What had the general decided? Would she really be allowed to attempt something that had never been done before?
Sarah kept walking, her steps steady and purposeful.
Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them doubt.
Tomorrow morning, she would begin showing them what determination looked like when it was backed by skill, courage, and the memory of a promise made by a Vietnamese sniper to a young American lieutenant in a jungle that existed only in history books and old men's memories. The sun climbed higher in the sky as Sarah reached her barracks. She had 6 weeks to prepare for the most challenging experience of her life. 6 weeks to prove that she belonged among the elite marksmen of the United States military. 6 weeks to honor the trust that General Harrison had placed in her and the memory of a soldier named Gwyn who had died believing that courage came in all shapes and sizes. She walked into her quarters, sat on her bunk, and began planning her training regimen. There would be no room for error, no second chances, and no excuses. The path ahead would test every aspect of her character, but Sarah Martinez had been preparing for this test her entire life, even if she hadn't known it until today. Outside her window, the sounds of military life continued as they had for decades before her arrival and would for decades after she was gone. But something had changed in that brief meeting with General Harrison, something that would ripple through the ranks and eventually change the face of military service forever. Sarah pulled out a notebook and began writing down her training goals for the next 6 weeks. At the top of the page, she wrote a single sentence that would guide every decision she made from that moment forward: skill and determination matter more than assumptions. Then, she began planning how to prove it. The alarm clock screamed at 0445 hours, 15 minutes before Sarah's scheduled meeting with Sergeant Rodriguez. She had been awake for over an hour, staring at the ceiling and running through mental preparations for what was about to begin. The brass cartridge from General Harrison sat on her nightstand, catching the first hints of dawn light that filtered through the barracks windows. Sarah dressed quickly in her physical training uniform, her movements precise and efficient. The other soldiers in her barracks were still sleeping, their steady breathing creating a rhythmic backdrop to her morning routine. She had chosen not to tell anyone about her meeting with the general or the opportunity that lay ahead. The fewer people who knew about her attempt to enter the advanced marksmanship program, the fewer people would witness her potential failure. As she laced up her boots, Sarah reflected on the conversation that had changed everything just 24 hours earlier. General Harrison's words about his Vietnamese friend Nguyen had revealed a depth to the intimidating officer that she had never suspected. More importantly, it had shown her that earning respect in the military wasn't about fitting into someone else's expectations, it was about exceeding those expectations so completely that they became irrelevant. The walk to the training facility took Sarah through the heart of the base. Early morning joggers were already making their rounds, their footsteps echoing off the concrete pathways. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass from the parade grounds and the faint aroma of coffee from the mess hall. These familiar smells had become the backdrop to her military life, but today they seemed different, more significant, as if she was experiencing them for the first time. Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for her at the entrance to Training Facility C, a building that Sarah had passed hundreds of times but never entered. Rodriguez was exactly what Central Casting would order for a military drill instructor: 6 feet 2 inches of solid muscle, with arms that looked like they could bend steel bars and a face that seemed permanently fixed in an expression of mild displeasure. His uniform was so perfectly pressed that it could have been used as a ruler, and his boots reflected the morning light like polished mirrors. "Private Martinez," Rodriguez said as she approached, his voice carrying the gravelly tone that came from years of shouting commands across training fields. "You're early." "Good. Early means you might actually give a damn about this opportunity." Sarah came to attention and snapped off a crisp salute. "Good morning, Sergeant Rodriguez." "Private Martinez reporting for preparatory training as ordered." Rodriguez returned her salute with mechanical precision, then gestured toward the building behind him. "Follow me, Private. We need to have a conversation before we begin." The interior of Training Facility C was unlike anything Sarah had seen before. The main room was enormous, with high ceilings that disappeared into shadows and walls lined with every type of weapon imaginable. Rifles, pistols, machine guns, and equipment she couldn't identify were displayed in perfect order, each one maintained to museum quality standards. The air smelled of gun oil and leather, creating an atmosphere that was both intimidating and oddly comforting. Rodriguez led her to a small office in the corner of the facility. The walls were covered with targets showing incredibly tight groupings of bullet holes, photographs of soldiers in various combat situations, and certificates from marksmanship competitions around the world. A single chair sat in front of a desk that looked like it had survived multiple wars. "Sit down, Private," Rodriguez commanded, taking his place behind the desk. "Before we waste any time or ammunition, I need to understand exactly what you think you're getting yourself into." Sarah settled into the chair, maintaining perfect posture despite the obvious attempts at intimidation. I'm here to prepare for advanced marksmanship training, Sergeant. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen.
That's what you think this is? Training? Private Martinez, what you're about to experience over the next 6 weeks isn't training. It's a systematic deconstruction of everything you think you know about shooting, followed by a complete rebuilding of your understanding of what it means to be a marksman. He picked up a thick folder from his desk and dropped it in front of her with a heavy thud. This contains the profiles of every soldier who has attempted the advanced marksmanship program over the past 5 years. 237 candidates. Want to guess how many successfully completed the program? Sarah remained silent, knowing that Rodriguez was building toward a point. 17, he continued. 17 out of 237.
That's a success rate of roughly 7%. And those 17 were all men with years of combat experience, extensive weapons training, and psychological profiles that suggested they could handle extreme stress without breaking. Rodriguez opened the folder and flipped through several pages.
Now, Private Martinez, can you tell me what makes you think you belong among that elite 7%? This was clearly a test, and Sarah recognized that her answer would determine how the next 6 weeks would unfold.
She could give the safe response, talking about her qualifications and training scores. Or she could take a risk and show Rodriguez the real reason she belonged here. Because I understand something that most people don't, Sergeant, Sarah said, meeting his gaze directly.
I understand that the weapon doesn't make the marksman.
The marksman makes the weapon. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow but said nothing, waiting for her to continue.
I've been around weapons my entire life, Sarah explained. My grandfather taught me that shooting isn't about power or intimidation or proving how tough you are. It's about patience, precision, and respect for the responsibility you're holding in your hands. Every time you pull that trigger, you're making a decision that can't be undone. The people who understand that weight are the ones who become true marksmen. Rodriguez closed the folder and leaned forward. Interesting philosophy, Private. Let's see if you can back it up with performance. He stood up and walked to a cabinet behind his desk, retrieving what appeared to be a standard M16 rifle. But, as he handed it to Sarah, she could immediately tell that this weapon was different from the one she had trained with before. The balance was perfect, the action smoother than silk, and every surface showed the kind of meticulous care that only came from years of professional maintenance. This rifle has been used to train every candidate who has attempted the advanced marksmanship program, Rodriguez explained. It's been zeroed to perfection, maintained to standards that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous, and has probably fired more rounds than most soldiers will see in their entire careers. Sarah accepted the rifle with the reverence it deserved, running her hands over its surface to familiarize herself with its unique characteristics. The stock fit her shoulder perfectly, the trigger had just enough resistance to prevent accidental discharge, and the sight picture was so clear it was almost like looking through a crystal window. Your first test begins now, Rodriguez announced, walking toward the door. Follow me to the range. The shooting range attached to Training Facility C was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her standard weapons qualification. Instead of the typical paper targets at predictable distances, this range featured a complex course with targets at varying ranges, different elevations, and obstacles that would challenge every aspect of a marksman's skills. Rodriguez handed her a magazine containing 20 rounds and pointed toward a shooting position at the far end of the range. Your task is simple, Private Martinez. You have 20 rounds to engage 20 targets. The distances range from 100 to 800 yards. Some targets will be stationary, others will move. Some will be clearly visible, others will require you to identify them among decoys and camouflage. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain calm. This was exactly the kind of challenge she had been hoping for. The passing score for this exercise is 18 out of 20 hits, Rodriguez continued. Most candidates require multiple attempts to achieve that score. Some never achieve it at all. You have one attempt right now, with no warm-up shots and no opportunity to adjust your sights or familiarize yourself with the course. Rodriguez checked his watch. You have 30 minutes to complete the course, beginning now. Sarah moved to the shooting position and took a moment to study the range layout. She could identify about half of the targets immediately. Some were clearly visible at moderate ranges, while others were partially concealed behind barriers or camouflaged to blend with their surroundings. The remaining targets would reveal themselves only when she began engaging the course systematically. She loaded the magazine into the rifle and chambered the first round, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't just about hitting targets, this was about proving that she belonged among the elite marksmen of the United States military. More than that, it was about honoring the memory of a Vietnamese soldier named Nguyen and the promise that General Harrison had carried for 27 years. Sarah took her position, brought the rifle to her shoulder, and began acquiring her first target. It was a standard silhouette at 200 yards, clearly visible against the backdrop of the range's hills. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow to a steady rhythm, and squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure her grandfather had taught her all those years ago. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a sharp crack, and she watched through the scope as the target went down. 1 hit out of 20, 19 rounds remaining. Rodriguez was watching from behind her, making notes on a clipboard but offering no encouragement or criticism. Sarah appreciated his professional detachment. This test needed to be about her performance, not about anyone's expectations or prejudices. The second target was at a much greater distance, easily 600 yards away and partially concealed behind a concrete barrier. Sarah adjusted her scope slightly, compensated for the wind that was starting to pick up, and took her time acquiring the target. The shot felt perfect as it left the barrel, and she was rewarded with the sight of the distant target falling. 2 hits, 18 rounds remaining. As the course progressed, Sarah found herself falling into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Each target presented a unique challenge: wind compensation, elevation adjustments, target identification among decoys, shots at moving targets that required her to lead them perfectly. But every challenge was met with skills that had been developing since she was 7 years old and standing on a fence post trying to hit tin cans with her grandfather's old hunting rifle. Target number 10 was the most difficult yet, a barely visible silhouette at nearly 800 yards that appeared for only 3 seconds before disappearing behind cover, then reappeared in a different location for another 3 seconds. Sarah had to identify the target, calculate the distance and wind compensation, and make the shot in the brief window when it was visible. She missed her first opportunity when the target appeared, using those precious seconds to gather information instead of attempting a rushed shot. When the target appeared in its second location, Sarah was ready. Her shot broke cleanly at the moment the target became visible, and she watched through her scope as it fell immediately. The discipline to gather information before shooting had paid off exactly as her grandfather had taught her it would. 15 hits out of 15 attempts, 5 rounds remaining. Rodriguez had stopped taking notes and was simply watching her performance with growing interest. Sarah could sense his attention, but she refused to let it distract her from the task at hand. The final 5 targets were going to be the most challenging, designed to separate the merely competent shooters from those with the potential to become elite marksmen. Target 16 appeared to be a standard silhouette at moderate range, but Sarah's instincts told her something was wrong. She studied it carefully through her scope and realized it was actually a decoy. The real target was a much smaller profile partially hidden behind the false target. This kind of target identification was exactly what separated advanced marksmen from regular soldiers. She engaged the real target and was rewarded with a clean hit. The 17th target required her to shoot through a narrow window in a mock building structure. The opening was barely large enough for a bullet to pass through, and the target behind it was moving slowly from left to right. Sarah had to time her shot perfectly to thread the bullet through the window at the exact moment when the target was in the ideal position. The shot required every bit of skill and patience she possessed, but when she squeezed the trigger, she knew it was perfect. Targets 18 and 19 were presented simultaneously, 2 moving targets at different distances traveling in opposite directions. Sarah had to engage them in rapid succession, switching between targets while maintaining the precision required for long-range shooting. The first shot dropped its target cleanly, and she smoothly transitioned to the second target, leading it perfectly and dropping it with her 19th round. One target remaining, one round left.
The final target was unlike anything Sarah had encountered in her military training. It appeared to be a standard silhouette at 300 yards, well within her comfort zone. But, as she studied it through her scope, she realized that this target was designed to test something beyond mere shooting accuracy. It was positioned in front of a backdrop that made it difficult to distinguish from the surrounding area, and the lighting conditions created shadows that obscured its exact outline. More importantly, Sarah noticed that there was a second silhouette partially hidden behind the primary target. This second silhouette was marked with a white band around the chest area, the universal indication of a non-combatant or friendly target. The test wasn't just about hitting the correct target, it was about target identification under pressure and the critical decision-making skills that would be required in real combat situations. Sarah took her time, studying the target picture carefully and confirming her identification of both silhouettes. The hostile target was clearly marked and positioned for engagement, while the friendly target was clearly marked and positioned in a way that required her to avoid it completely. She aligned her crosshairs on the hostile target, confirmed that her shot would not endanger the friendly target, and squeezed the trigger for the 20th and final time. The hostile target dropped immediately while the friendly target remained untouched.
20 targets engaged, 20 hits scored, 0 rounds remaining.
Rodriguez walked up to her position and took the rifle from her hands. For a long moment, he said nothing, simply studying the scorecard he had been maintaining throughout the exercise. "Private Martinez," he finally said, "in 5 years of conducting this initial assessment, I have never had a candidate achieve a perfect score on their first attempt." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she kept her expression neutral.
"Thank you, Sergeant." Rodriguez shook his head. "Don't thank me yet, Private. That was just the shooting portion of your assessment.
Physical conditioning begins in 10 minutes, followed by psychological evaluation this afternoon, tactical studies this evening, and field exercises starting tomorrow morning." He paused, then looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of respect. "But, I will say this, you've earned the right to continue.
Most candidates wash out during the shooting assessment.
You've proven that you at least understand what end of the rifle the bullets come out of." Rodriguez led her back toward the training facility, but stopped at the entrance and turned to face her.
"Private Martinez, I need you to understand something before we continue.
What you accomplished on that range this morning was impressive, but it was also the easiest thing you'll be asked to do over the next 6 weeks."
Sarah nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The advanced marksmanship program isn't designed to teach good shooters to become great shooters," Rodriguez explained.
"It's designed to take exceptional shooters and turn them into something else entirely. Something that can function under conditions that would break most people psychologically and physically." He gestured toward the training facility behind them. "Over the next 6 weeks, you're going to be pushed beyond every limit you think you have. You're going to be cold, tired, hungry, and stressed in ways you've never experienced. You're going to be asked to make shots that seem impossible under conditions that would challenge a machine, let alone a human being." Rodriguez opened the door and held it for her. "More than that, you're going to be evaluated not just on your performance, but on your potential to handle the mental and emotional demands of being a military marksman. The people who succeed in this program don't just hit targets, they make decisions under pressure that can determine the outcome of entire operations." As they walked back into the building, Sarah felt the weight of the brass cartridge in her pocket. General Harrison had warned her about the responsibility she was asking to shoulder, and now Rodriguez was showing her the first glimpse of what that responsibility actually meant. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Sarah said, "can I ask you something?" "What is it, Private?" "How many of the candidates who passed your shooting assessment went on to complete the full program?" Rodriguez stopped walking and looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read. "In 5 years, Private Martinez, 73 candidates have achieved passing scores on the initial shooting assessment. Of those 73, 17 completed the advanced marksmanship program." Sarah did the math quickly in her head. "A success rate of roughly 23% among those who made it past the initial screening. The others washed out for various reasons," Rodriguez continued. Physical inability to handle the training conditions, psychological breakdown under stress, inability to adapt to advanced tactical concepts, or simple loss of motivation when they realized what the program actually demanded of them. They reached Rodriguez's office, and he gestured for her to sit down again.
Private Martinez, I'm going to give you one opportunity to walk away from this program with your dignity intact. You've proven that you can shoot better than 90% of the soldiers in this army. You could have a distinguished career in conventional military roles without subjecting yourself to what comes next.
Sarah met his gaze directly.
Are you asking me to quit, Sergeant?
I'm giving you the opportunity to make an informed decision about whether you want to continue. Sarah thought about the question for a moment, considering everything she had learned in the past 24 hours. She thought about General Harrison's story of Nguyen, the Vietnamese sniper whose memory had opened the door to this opportunity. She thought about her grandfather's lessons about courage and determination. Most of all, she thought about the brass cartridge in her pocket and the promise it represented.
Sergeant Rodriguez, she said, with all due respect, if this program was easy, everyone would qualify for it.
I didn't come here looking for an easy path to success. I came here looking for the chance to prove that I belong among the elite marksmen of this military, regardless of what anyone expects of me.
Rodriguez nodded slowly. Fair enough, Private. Physical conditioning begins in 5 minutes.
Change into your PT gear and meet me at the obstacle course behind this building.
And, Private Martinez?
Yes, Sergeant?
Bring water. Lots of water.
As Sarah changed into her physical training uniform, she could hear activity beginning outside the building. Equipment being moved, courses being prepared, the sounds of a training regimen that was about to test every aspect of her physical and mental preparation. She secured the brass cartridge in her pocket and headed outside to face the next phase of her journey. The perfect shooting performance had earned her the right to continue, but Rodriguez had made it clear that the real challenges were just beginning. Sarah Martinez was about to discover exactly what it meant to pursue excellence in the United States military. The obstacle course behind Training Facility C looked like it had been designed by someone with a personal grudge against the human body. Sarah stared at the series of walls, ropes, mud pits, and climbing structures that stretched out before her, trying to process the fact that this was just the beginning of her physical conditioning assessment.
Sergeant Rodriguez stood beside her, checking items off a list on his clipboard.
This course is designed to simulate the physical demands that advanced marksmen face in real operational environments, he explained, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing the weather. You'll be carrying a 40-pound pack throughout the course, along with your rifle and additional equipment.
Sarah looked at the pack Rodriguez was holding out to her.
It was loaded with what appeared to be standard field gear, but she knew that the weight distribution and balance would be carefully calculated to make every movement more challenging. The course must be completed in under 45 minutes, Rodriguez continued, helping her adjust the straps of the heavy pack. Any longer than that indicates insufficient physical conditioning for the advanced marksmanship program.
Most candidates require multiple attempts to achieve a passing time.
Sarah felt the weight settle onto her shoulders and back. 40 pounds didn't sound like much in theory, but she knew from her basic training that carrying that load through an obstacle course would test her endurance in ways that simple calisthenics never could.
There's one more element to this assessment, Rodriguez said, handing her a rifle.
At 5 stations throughout the course, you'll be required to engage targets from various shooting positions. These shots will test your ability to maintain marksmanship accuracy while under physical stress.
Sarah accepted the rifle and checked its condition automatically.
It was the same weapon she had used for her morning shooting assessment, but now it felt heavier, more cumbersome with the addition of the pack and the knowledge that she would be carrying it for the next 45 minutes. The targets at each station must be engaged within 10 seconds of your arrival, Rodriguez explained. This simulates the rapid target engagement required in tactical situations.
Missing any target results in an automatic failure of the assessment. Sarah nodded, understanding the logic behind the test.
In real operational situations, marksmen often had to move quickly across difficult terrain while maintaining the physical and mental composure necessary for accurate shooting. This assessment was designed to determine whether she could handle the dual demand.
Rodriguez checked his watch. You begin in 30 seconds, Private Martinez. The first obstacle is the rope climb directly in front of you. After that, you'll navigate the course following the marked path. Each shooting station is clearly marked with red flags. Sarah took a moment to study the first obstacle. The rope stretched 20 feet into the air, secured to a wooden beam that looked older than she was. Climbing 20 feet with 40 pounds on her back would require technique more than raw strength, and she mentally reviewed the climbing methods her basic training instructors had drilled into her. 10 seconds, Rodriguez announced. Sarah moved to the base of the rope and gripped it firmly with both hands, testing its texture and stability. The rifle was slung across her back in a position that would allow her to climb while keeping the weapon secure. Time. Sarah began climbing immediately, using her legs to grip the rope while her arms pulled her upward. The extra weight made every movement more deliberate, but her technique remained solid. Hand over hand, leg lock, push up, repeat. The rhythm was steady and efficient, conserving energy while maintaining progress. At the top of the rope, Sarah rang the bell that marked successful completion of the obstacle, then rappelled down the opposite side using the controlled descent technique that prevented the rope from burning her hands. Her boots hit the ground with barely 30 seconds elapsed. The next obstacle was a series of hurdles at varying heights, designed to test agility while carrying the heavy pack. Sarah approached them at a steady jog, timing her steps to clear each barrier cleanly without breaking stride. The pack shifted slightly with each jump, but she had adjusted the straps tightly enough to prevent it from throwing off her balance. As she cleared the final hurdle, Sarah spotted the first shooting station 50 yards ahead. A red flag marked the position, and she could see a target at approximately 200 yards beyond the shooting line. She had 10 seconds from the moment she reached the station to engage the target successfully. Sarah reached the shooting station and immediately dropped into a prone shooting position, using the natural terrain to support her aim. The physical exertion from the obstacles had elevated her heart rate and breathing, but her grandfather's training kicked in automatically. She controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. The target went down with 7 seconds to spare. Rodriguez was tracking her progress from a vantage point that allowed him to observe both her obstacle performance and her shooting accuracy. Sarah could see him making notes, but his expression remained neutral and professional. The second section of the course included a crawl under barbed wire through a muddy pit, followed by a wall climb that required her to boost herself over a 12-foot barrier. The mud added weight to her uniform and made every surface slippery, but Sarah maintained her pace and technique throughout. By the time she reached the second shooting station, Sarah could feel the physical stress beginning to accumulate. Her breathing was heavier, and she could feel sweat starting to build under the heavy pack. But when she dropped into position for the second shot, her hands remained steady and her sight picture was clear. The second target was at a greater distance and required a slight wind adjustment. Sarah made the calculation quickly and engaged the target with 6 seconds remaining. The middle section of the course was designed to test upper body strength and coordination. A series of monkey bars stretched across a water obstacle, forcing candidates to support their full body weight plus equipment while moving hand over hand across the gap. Sarah approached the monkey bars with determination, knowing that falling into the water below would add both weight and time to her remaining course. Her grip on the first bar was secure, but she could immediately feel the strain in her shoulders and arms from supporting the additional 40 pounds of equipment. Hand over hand, she worked her way across the obstacle, fighting the urge to rush and risk losing her grip. Halfway across, Sarah felt her grip on the bars beginning to slip from the accumulated sweat and moisture. She forced herself to pause for a moment, adjust her grip, and continue with deliberate movements rather than trying to power through with failing technique. Her boots hit the far side of the obstacle with her time still well within the acceptable range. The third shooting station was immediately ahead, marked by another red flag. This shooting position required her to engage a target from a standing position without any external support. After the strain of the monkey bars, Sarah's arms were trembling slightly, but she used her shooting sling to create stability and controlled her breathing to steady her aim. The third target fell with 8 seconds to spare.
Rodriguez was keeping pace with her progress, moving between vantage points to observe different aspects of her performance. Sarah noticed that he was paying particular attention to her recovery between obstacles, evaluating how quickly she could transition from physical exertion to the precise motor control required for accurate shooting. The fourth section of the course included a combination of sprints and tactical movement. Sarah had to cover several hundred yards of varied terrain while maintaining awareness of her surroundings and moving tactically from cover to cover. This portion simulated the movement requirements that marksmen faced while advancing to or withdrawing from shooting positions in hostile environments. The sprint sections pushed her cardiovascular conditioning to its limits, while the tactical movement portions required her to maintain situational awareness while managing her equipment and conserving energy. Sarah found herself drawing on every aspect of her military training, from basic fitness to field craft to weapons handling. The fourth shooting station presented her with the most challenging shot yet. The target was positioned at maximum range and partially concealed behind terrain features. Additionally, she had to engage it from an awkward shooting position that didn't allow her to use standard techniques. Sarah's heart was pounding from the physical exertion, and she could feel the effects of fatigue beginning to impact her fine motor control. But she forced herself to slow down, use the shooting fundamentals her grandfather had taught her, and trust her training. The shot felt less perfect than her previous engagements, but the target went down with 5 seconds remaining. The final section of the course was designed to test candidates when they were already exhausted and operating on willpower rather than physical reserves. A steep hill climb led to an elevated platform where the final shooting station waited. Sarah attacked the hill with determination, but she could feel her leg muscles burning from the accumulated fatigue of the previous obstacles. The pack seemed to get heavier with each step, and her breathing became labored despite her excellent physical conditioning. At the top of the hill, Sarah could see the final shooting station and the target beyond it. This target was the smallest yet, positioned at long range and moving slowly across her field of view. She would have to calculate lead time while managing the effects of physical exhaustion and elevated stress. Sarah reached the shooting station with her legs trembling from fatigue and her heart rate elevated well beyond her normal shooting parameters. But, as she dropped into position for the final shot, something remarkable happened. All the noise in her mind disappeared, replaced by the calm focus that her grandfather had taught her to find in moments of pressure. The target was moving from left to right at a steady pace. Sarah calculated the lead time, compensated for her elevated heart rate by timing her shot for the natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had used thousands of times before. The target stopped moving immediately. Sarah completed the final sprint to the finish line with 3 minutes to spare on her 45-minute time limit. As she crossed the line, she finally allowed herself to acknowledge the full extent of her exhaustion. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, mud covered her from the crawling obstacles, and her muscles trembled from the sustained effort. Rodriguez approached her as she was removing the heavy pack and setting down her rifle. For the first time since they had begun working together, his expression showed something that might have been approval. "Private Martinez," he said, "your time was 38 minutes and 47 seconds. All 5 targets were successfully engaged within the time parameters." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction, but she knew better than to celebrate prematurely. However, Rodriguez continued, "This was only the physical conditioning portion of your assessment. This afternoon, you'll undergo psychological evaluation to determine your stress tolerance and decision-making capabilities under pressure." Rodriguez handed her a water bottle and gestured toward a bench where she could rest. "Take 30 minutes to recover and clean up. Report to Building 7 at 1,400 hours for your psychological assessment." As Sarah sat on the bench and rehydrated, she reflected on what she had just accomplished. The obstacle course had pushed her to her physical limits, but, more importantly, it had tested her ability to maintain marksmanship accuracy while under stress. The fact that she had successfully engaged all 5 targets while managing the physical demands of the course suggested that she was developing the kind of multitasking ability that advanced marksmen required. But Rodriguez's warnings about the psychological assessment reminded her that physical capability was only part of the equation. The advanced marksmanship program was designed to train soldiers who would operate alone, often behind enemy lines, making life and death decisions without immediate support or supervision. The psychological demands of that role required mental toughness that went far beyond simple courage or determination. Sarah finished her water and headed back to the barracks to clean up and prepare for the next phase of her evaluation. The brass cartridge in her pocket had become warm from her body heat during the physical exertion, and she touched it briefly as a reminder of the promise she had made to herself and to the memory of a Vietnamese soldier who had died believing in the potential of unlikely heroes. The afternoon psychological assessment would determine whether she had the mental resilience required for advanced marksmanship training. Like everything else in her military career, it would be a test that she would face on her own merits, without special treatment or lowered expectations. Building 7 was located on the far side of the base, away from the regular training facilities and administrative buildings. Sarah had never been inside it before, but she had heard other soldiers refer to it in hushed tones as the place where military psychologists conducted evaluations that could determine the course of entire careers. As she walked toward her appointment, Sarah thought about the conversation she had overheard in the mess hall the previous evening. Two soldiers had been discussing a friend who had washed out of special operations training after failing the psychological assessment. They had described the tests as being designed to find psychological weaknesses and exploit them until candidates broke under pressure. Sarah understood the logic behind such testing. Military marksmen operated under conditions that would challenge the mental stability of most people. They needed to be able to function effectively while isolated from support, make critical decisions under extreme stress, and carry out missions that required them to take human life from positions where they could see their targets clearly. The mental toughness required for such work went far beyond normal courage or determination. It required a specific type of psychological resilience that allowed individuals to compartmentalize their emotions, function rationally under pressure, and maintain moral clarity while operating in morally complex situations. As Sarah reached Building 7, she noticed that its architecture was different from the other structures on the base. Where most military buildings were designed for functionality and efficiency, this building seemed designed to create a specific psychological atmosphere. The entrance was smaller than necessary, the windows were positioned to limit natural light, and the overall design created a sense of isolation and introspection. Sarah checked in with the receptionist and was directed to a waiting area that contained only a few chairs and several magazines that appeared to be at least a decade old. The silence in the building was almost complete, broken only by the quiet hum of air conditioning and the occasional sound of footsteps in distant corridors. After 15 minutes of waiting, a door opened and a woman in military uniform emerged. She was tall and thin, with graying hair pulled back in a precise bun and eyes that seemed to see more than most people revealed. "Private Martinez? I'm Major Patricia Williams. Please come with me." Sarah followed Major Williams down a corridor lined with unmarked doors. The lighting was subdued, creating an atmosphere that was neither welcoming nor hostile, but simply neutral and somehow unsettling. The room where Major Williams conducted her interviews was small and windowless, furnished with only two chairs facing each other across a small table. A recording device sat in the center of the table, its red light indicating that it was already active. "Please have a seat, Private Martinez," Major Williams said, settling into the chair across from her. "This interview is being recorded for evaluation purposes. Do you have any objections to that?" "No, ma'am," Sarah replied. Major Williams opened a thick folder and studied its contents for several moments. "Private Martinez, I've been conducting psychological assessments for military personnel for over 15 years. During that time, I've evaluated candidates for every special operations program in the United States military." She looked up from the folder and made direct eye contact with Sarah. "The purpose of this assessment is not to determine whether you're psychologically healthy. We already know that from your basic training evaluations. The purpose is to determine whether you have the specific psychological characteristics required for success in the advanced marksmanship program." Major Williams leaned back in her chair. "The soldiers who succeed in this program share certain mental traits that allow them to function effectively under conditions that would break most people. These traits include emotional compartmentalization, stress tolerance, decision-making ability under pressure, and what we call moral clarity." Sarah nodded, waiting for the questions to begin.
Let's start with a simple scenario, Major Williams said. You're positioned as an Overwatch sniper for a convoy moving through hostile territory. Through your scope, you observe an individual placing what appears to be an improvised explosive device along the convoy route. Major Williams paused, studying Sarah's reaction. However, the individual appears to be a child, approximately 12 years old. You have a clear shot, and your radio contact with the convoy has been disrupted, so you cannot warn them of the threat. You have approximately 30 seconds before the convoy reaches the potential explosion point. What do you do? Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she considered the scenario. This wasn't just a theoretical question, it was the kind of impossible decision that military marksmen actually faced in real operational environments. The psychological assessment was designed to determine how she would handle such situations. I would take the shot, Sarah said after careful consideration. The protection of American soldiers takes priority over other considerations. The age of the individual placing the device doesn't change the threat they represent to the convoy. Major Williams made a note in her file. Can you explain your reasoning? In a combat environment, threats must be neutralized based on their potential to cause harm, not on the characteristics of the individuals creating those threats, Sarah explained. A 12-year-old with an explosive device represents the same tactical threat as an adult with the same device. My responsibility is to protect the convoy, and that responsibility doesn't change based on factors that don't affect the tactical situation. Major Williams nodded and moved to the next question. Private Martinez, describe for me the most stressful situation you've experienced in your military service so far. Sarah thought for a moment, then described an incident during advanced infantry training when she had been required to lead her squad through a night navigation exercise in unfamiliar terrain during a severe thunderstorm. Equipment failures had left them without GPS or radio contact, and she had been forced to rely on map and compass navigation to reach their objective while ensuring the safety of her squad members. What made that situation particularly stressful for you? Major Williams asked. The responsibility for other people's safety, Sarah replied immediately. I can handle physical discomfort, equipment failures, and navigational challenges. But knowing that my decisions could directly impact the welfare of my squad members created a level of pressure that I hadn't experienced before. Major Williams made another note. How did you handle that pressure? I focused on the fundamentals of navigation and leadership that my training had provided, Sarah said. I broke the problem down into manageable components, made decisions based on available information, and communicated clearly with my squad about our situation and our plan. The questions continued for over an hour, covering scenarios that ranged from tactical decision-making under pressure to personal values and moral reasoning. Some questions were straightforward assessments of Sarah's judgment and reasoning abilities. Others were clearly designed to probe for psychological weaknesses or areas where stress might compromise her effectiveness. Major Williams asked her to describe her motivations for pursuing advanced marksmanship training, her understanding of what the role would require, and her assessment of her own psychological strengths and limitations. Each answer was followed by clarifying questions that probed deeper into her reasoning and self-awareness. The final portion of the interview focused on scenarios specifically related to marksmanship duties. Major Williams presented Sarah with hypothetical situations where she would be required to make split-second decisions about target identification, engagement priorities, and mission parameters while operating alone and without immediate supervision. Private Martinez, Major Williams said as the interview concluded, "Is there anything else you believe I should know about your psychological readiness for advanced marksmanship training?" Sarah thought for a moment, then decided to share something she hadn't planned to discuss. Major Williams, I carry a brass cartridge that belonged to a Vietnamese soldier who served with General Harrison during the Vietnam War. The general gave it to me as a reminder of the responsibility I'm asking to shoulder. She pulled the cartridge from her pocket and placed it on the table between them. This reminds me that marksmanship isn't about personal achievement or proving anything about myself. It's about serving a purpose larger than my individual goals and honoring the sacrifice of the people who came before me. Major Williams picked up the cartridge and examined it carefully. Tell me more about that.
The soldier who carried this cartridge died protecting his fellow soldiers, Sarah explained. General Harrison told me that this soldier understood something important about courage, that it comes in all shapes and sizes, and that the most dangerous assumptions we make are the ones about people's limitations based on what we see on the surface. Sarah paused, then continued. I believe that understanding is essential for anyone who wants to serve as a military marksman.
We're not just weapons operators.
We're guardians who accept the responsibility to make decisions that other people can't or shouldn't have to make. Major Williams handed the cartridge back to Sarah and made a final note in her file.
Thank you, Private Martinez. Your assessment is complete. You'll receive notification of the results within 24 hours.
As Sarah walked back across the base toward her barracks, she reflected on the psychological assessment and what it had revealed about herself. The questions had forced her to confront aspects of military service that she had only considered in abstract terms before. The scenarios Major Williams had presented weren't just theoretical exercises, they were glimpses into the real moral and psychological challenges that advanced marksmen faced in operational environments. But, more than that, the assessment had clarified her own motivations and understanding of what she was pursuing. Sarah Martinez wanted to become a military marksman not to prove anything about gender equality or to challenge anyone's assumptions about women in combat roles. She wanted to serve in that capacity because she understood the responsibility it entailed and believed she could fulfill that responsibility effectively. The brass cartridge in her pocket had become more than just a reminder of General Harrison's trust in her potential. It had become a symbol of the continuity between past and present, between the Vietnamese soldier who had died protecting his fellow soldiers and her own commitment to serve in the same capacity. Tomorrow would bring the final phase of her preparatory training, tactical studies, and field exercises that would test her ability to apply everything she had learned in realistic operational scenarios. But tonight, Sarah felt confident that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The notification arrived at 0530 hours, slipped under Sarah's barracks door while she was completing her morning physical training routine. She had been awake since 0430, unable to sleep as she waited for the results of her psychological assessment. The envelope was standard military issue, with her name typed across the front in official formatting that revealed nothing about its contents. Sarah opened the envelope with steady hands, though she could feel her heart rate increasing with anticipation. The document inside was brief and official, signed by Major Williams and countersigned by Sergeant Rodriguez. Private Martinez has successfully completed all phases of the preparatory assessment for advanced marksmanship training. Psychological evaluation indicates exceptional stress tolerance, sound judgment under pressure, and appropriate moral reasoning for military marksmanship duties.
Candidate is approved for entry into the Advanced Marksmanship Program.
Report to Training Facility C at 0600 hours for final briefing in program commencement. Sarah read the document 3 times before the reality of her success fully settled in. She had passed every test, overcome every obstacle, and earned her place in one of the most exclusive training programs in the United States military. But, rather than celebration, she felt a profound sense of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. The brass cartridge seemed heavier in her pocket as she prepared for what she knew would be her final meeting with Sergeant Rodriguez before beginning the actual advanced marksmanship program. Everything up to this point had been preparation and assessment. What came next would be the real test of her capabilities and determination. Training Facility C felt different as Sarah approached it in the early morning light. Where it had previously seemed intimidating and unknown, it now felt like the threshold to a new phase of her military career. The building that housed the most advanced marksmanship training in the world was about to become her second home for the most challenging weeks of her life. Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for her in the main training room, but he was not alone. General Harrison stood beside him, along with 2 other officers that Sarah didn't recognize. The presence of such high-ranking officials suggested that her entry into the program was being watched at levels far above the typical training oversight. Private Martinez, General Harrison said as she entered and came to attention, "Congratulations on your successful completion of the preparatory assessment. Sergeant Rodriguez has informed me that your performance exceeded expectations in all evaluated areas." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she kept her response professional.
"Thank you, sir.
I'm ready to begin the advanced marksmanship program. General Harrison gestured toward the two officers beside him.
Before we proceed, I'd like you to meet Colonel James Mitchell and Major Sarah Chen.
Colonel Mitchell oversees all special operations marksmanship programs for this command. Major Chen is a military psychologist who specializes in the mental conditioning aspects of advanced marksmanship training. Sarah saluted both officers, who returned her salute with the crisp precision that marked all military interactions at this level. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward, his bearing carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent decades in special operations.
Private Martinez, your entry into this program represents more than just an individual achievement.
You're breaking new ground, and that comes with additional responsibilities and pressures that most candidates don't face. He paused, studying her face carefully. The media attention, the political implications, and the symbolic importance of your success or failure will create distractions that could compromise your training if you allow them to.
Are you prepared to handle those additional pressures while maintaining focus on the demanding curriculum ahead?
Sarah had expected this conversation and had prepared her response carefully. Sir, I understand the broader implications of my participation in this program. However, my primary focus is on meeting the same standards as every other candidate and proving myself through performance rather than through statements or gestures.
Colonel Mitchell nodded approvingly. Good answer, Private.
The program you're entering has been refined over decades to produce marksmen capable of operating in the most challenging environments imaginable. The curriculum will push you beyond your physical, mental, and emotional limits. Many candidates who begin this program don't complete it, and those who do are fundamentally changed by the experience.
Major Chen stepped forward, adding her perspective to the briefing.
Private Martinez, the psychological conditioning aspects of this program are designed to develop mental resilience that goes far beyond normal stress tolerance. You'll be placed in situations that simulate the isolation, pressure, and moral complexity that operational marksmen face in real-world deployments. She opened a folder and referenced several documents. Your psychological assessment indicates that you have the baseline mental characteristics required for this training. However, possessing those characteristics and successfully developing them under extreme stress are two different things.
Are you certain that you're prepared for psychological conditioning that will challenge every aspect of your mental and emotional stability? Sarah thought about the question seriously before responding.
Major Chen, I understand that I don't know exactly what this training will demand of me. But I also know that the only way to discover my true capabilities is to test them under the most challenging conditions possible.
I'm ready for that challenge.
General Harrison stepped forward, his expression serious but somehow proud.
Private Martinez, there's one more matter we need to discuss before you begin the program.
He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew another brass cartridge, identical to the one Sarah carried.
This cartridge came from the same rifle as the one I gave you yesterday.
Nguyen carried both of them during his final mission. General Harrison handed the second cartridge to Sarah, who accepted it with the reverence such an artifact deserved. I want you to understand why I'm giving you this second cartridge, Private Martinez. Sarah waited for his explanation, sensing that this moment was somehow pivotal to everything that would follow. The first cartridge represents the promise I made to Nguyen about recognizing potential regardless of preconceived notions, General Harrison explained. This second cartridge represents the promise you're making to yourself and to everyone who has invested in your success.
He gestured toward the advanced weapons displayed throughout the training facility.
When you complete this program, and I say when, not if, because I believe you will complete it, you'll be entrusted with capabilities that can change the outcome of entire operations.
You'll be given missions that require you to make decisions that most people couldn't live with.
General Harrison's voice took on the tone of absolute seriousness.
That level of responsibility requires more than just skill with a rifle.
It requires moral clarity, emotional stability, and the kind of mental toughness that allows you to carry out necessary missions while maintaining your humanity. Sarah placed the second cartridge in her pocket alongside the first, feeling the symbolic weight of the promises they represented.
I understand, sir.
Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, carrying a set of equipment that Sarah recognized as advanced field gear.
Private Martinez, the next 6 weeks will consist of 4 phases of training.
Phase 1 focuses on advanced marksmanship techniques and equipment familiarization.
Phase 2 covers tactical movement and camouflage in various operational environments. Phase 3 involves mission planning and execution under realistic field conditions. Phase 4 is the final evaluation, which includes a comprehensive field exercise that simulates actual operational deployment. Rodriguez set the equipment on a nearby table and began explaining each item.
This gear represents the most advanced marksmanship equipment available to the United States military. You'll be training with precision rifles, advanced optics, range-finding equipment, and communication systems that are classified above your current clearance level.
Sarah examined the equipment with growing excitement and trepidation.
The rifles were works of engineering art, precision instruments that represented decades of development and refinement. The optics systems looked like something from a science fiction movie, with digital displays and computation capabilities that would transform the traditional marksmanship equation. However, Rodriguez continued, all of this advanced equipment is worthless without the fundamental skills and mental conditioning that this program is designed to develop. The technology enhances capability, but it doesn't replace the basic requirements of patience, precision, and psychological resilience.
Colonel Mitchell checked his watch and addressed the group. The formal program begins at 0800 hours.
Private Martinez, you have 90 minutes to prepare your personal gear and report back here for your first advanced marksmanship session. As the senior officers prepared to leave, General Harrison approached Sarah one final time.
Private Martinez, I want you to remember something throughout the challenges ahead. Success in this program isn't measured by how easily you overcome obstacles.
It's measured by how you respond when you encounter obstacles that seem impossible to overcome.
He paused at the door and looked back at her. Win succeeded not because he was naturally gifted or because his training was easy.
He succeeded because he refused to accept limitations that others tried to impose on him. That same refusal to accept limitations is what will determine your success or failure in this program.
After the officers left, Sarah found herself alone with Sergeant Rodriguez in the main training room.
The equipment, weapons, and advanced systems around her represented the culmination of everything she had been working toward since the day she had decided to pursue advanced marksmanship training. Private Martinez, Rodriguez said, I have one final piece of advice before we begin the formal program. Sarah turned to face him, recognizing that his tone had shifted from the professional formality of the briefing to something more personal and direct. Over the next 6 weeks, you're going to face challenges that will test every aspect of your character, Rodriguez explained. There will be moments when you question whether you belong here, moments when the physical and mental demands seem impossible to meet, and moments when failure seems like the easier option. Rodriguez walked to the window that overlooked the training grounds where Sarah's journey had begun just days earlier.
When those moments come, and they will come, I want you to remember something.
Every marksman who has successfully completed this program has faced those same moments of doubt and challenge.
The difference between those who succeed and those who fail isn't the absence of doubt.
It's the decision to continue moving forward despite that doubt.
Sarah nodded, understanding that Rodriguez was sharing wisdom earned through years of training elite marksmen. Thank you, Sergeant. I won't forget that.
Rodriguez turned back to face her, and, for the first time since they had begun working together, he allowed himself a genuine smile.
Private Martinez, I've been conducting preparatory assessments for this program for 5 years. In that time, I've evaluated over 200 candidates. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your performance over the past week has been exceptional by any standard.
More importantly, your attitude and understanding of what this program represents suggests that you have the potential to become not just a successful graduate, but an outstanding operational marksman. Sarah felt a surge of confidence, but Rodriguez's next words brought her back to the reality of what lay ahead. However, he continued, the preparatory assessment represents roughly 5% of the total challenge you'll face in this program. What begins this morning will test you in ways that no assessment or simulation can prepare you for. Rodriguez handed her a key to a secure locker that contained her assigned equipment.
The next time we meet formally, it will be as instructor and student in the advanced marksmanship program.
The personal conversations end here. From this point forward, you'll be held to the same standards as every other candidate, with no allowances for the unique circumstances of your participation.
Sarah accepted the key and understood that this moment marked a transition from preparation to actual performance.
Everything up to this point had been about proving that she deserved the opportunity.
Everything that followed would be about proving that she could excel when given that opportunity.
As Rodriguez prepared to leave, he offered one final observation.
Private Martinez, you've earned your place in this program through exceptional performance and unwavering determination.
Now you have the opportunity to discover just how far that performance and determination can take you. Sarah spent the next hour organizing her equipment and mentally preparing for the beginning of the most challenging training program in the United States military. The advanced marksmanship course would test every skill she had developed, every lesson she had learned, and every aspect of her character that would determine her success as a military marksman. The brass cartridges in her pocket served as constant reminders of the promises and responsibilities she carried. The first cartridge represented General Harrison's faith in her potential and the memory of a Vietnamese soldier who had died believing in the possibility of unlikely heroes. The second cartridge represented her own commitment to excellence and the determination to prove that skill and character mattered more than anyone's expectations or assumptions. As Sarah walked toward the advanced training facility for the beginning of the actual program, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a young girl learning to shoot tin cans on her grandfather's ranch to a United States Army private about to begin the most elite marksmanship training in the world, every step had been building toward this opportunity. The morning sun was rising over the training grounds, casting long shadows that reminded Sarah of that first day when she had walked toward General Harrison's office with nothing but determination and a dream. Now she carried advanced equipment, specialized training, and the confidence that came from having proven herself under the most demanding conditions her instructors could devise. But, more than that, Sarah Martinez carried the understanding that becoming an elite military marksman wasn't about personal achievement or breaking barriers. It was about accepting responsibility for missions that required the highest levels of skill, judgment, and moral clarity. It was about serving something larger than herself and honoring the sacrifice of those who had come before her. The brass cartridges clicked softly together in her pocket as Sarah opened the door to Training Facility C and stepped across the threshold into the next phase of her military career. Behind her lay weeks of preparation, assessment, and proof that she belonged among the candidates for advanced marksmanship training. Ahead of her lay 6 weeks of training that would determine whether she could become one of the elite marksmen trusted with the most demanding missions in the United States military. The outcome wasn't guaranteed, and the challenges ahead would test her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But Sarah Martinez had learned something important about herself during the preparatory training. She had learned that her capabilities weren't limited by anyone else's expectations or assumptions. She had learned that skill and determination could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. Most importantly, she had learned that the real test of character wasn't how you performed when things were easy, but how you responded when faced with challenges that required everything you had to give. As the door closed behind her and she prepared to begin the advanced marksmanship program, Sarah touched the brass cartridges one more time. They served as reminders that she wasn't just pursuing personal success, she was continuing a tradition of service and sacrifice that connected her to every soldier who had ever accepted the responsibility to stand guard over others. The morning light streamed through the windows of the training facility, illuminating the advanced equipment and weapons that would become the tools of her trade if she successfully completed the program ahead. But the real tools of her success were the lessons her grandfather had taught her about patience and precision, the values her military training had instilled about duty and honor, and the understanding that true strength came not from what others expected of her, but from what she expected of herself. Sarah Martinez was ready to discover just how far those tools could take her in the most demanding training program the United States military had to offer. The brass cartridges in her pocket carried the weight of promises made and responsibilities accepted. The rifle she would soon carry would be the instrument through which she would fulfill those promises and prove herself worthy of the trust that General Harrison, Sergeant Rodriguez, and countless others had placed in her potential. The advanced marksman.